The sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Le Petit Jardin, one of Philadelphia's most exclusive restaurants. Karen Davidson adjusted her pearl necklace as she settled into her usual seat at her favorite corner table, surrounded by her monthly lunch group, a collection of equally wealthy women who'd made it their tradition to meet here on the first Thursday of every month. "Ladies, can you believe they changed the menu font? It's so common now," Karen commented, squinting at the elegantly bound menu through her designer glasses. Her friends nodded in agreement, each of them looking for something to criticize about the restaurant that had served them flawlessly for the past 3 years. The gentle clicking of comfortable work shoes approached their table, and Gabrielle Thompson appeared with a warm, professional smile. Her dark hair was neatly pulled back in a bun, her uniform pressed to perfection, and her notebook ready in hand. Despite working a double shift and having just finished a morning of medical school classes, her energy remained bright and genuine. "Good afternoon, ladies. Welcome to Le Petit Jardin. I'm Gabrielle, and I'll be taking care of you today. Can I start you off with our signature champagne? We just received a wonderful new vintage that I think you'll love." Karen barely looked up from her menu, waving her hand dismissively. "Just bring us water for now. And make sure it's room temperature with lemon on the side, not in the water." She turned to her friends, speaking as if Gabrielle wasn't there. "You know, the service here isn't what it used to be. Remember Thomas? He knew exactly how we liked everything." Gabrielle maintained her composure, years of customer service experience evident in her unchanging smile. "Of course, I'll bring that right away. And I'll make sure to remember your preferences for future visits." As Gabrielle walked away, Karen's friend Linda leaned in, her voice dropping to a stage whisper. "Did you see her name tag? She must be working here to pay for school or something. Not everyone can afford to just attend medical school like your Michael did." The next 45 minutes unfolded like a masterclass in passive-aggressive behavior. Karen found fault with everything. The water wasn't quite room temperature, the bread wasn't fresh enough, though it had come out of the oven 10 minutes ago, and her salad had too much dressing, despite her specific instructions. Through it all, Gabrielle moved with grace and efficiency. She anticipated their needs, fixed their complaints without argument, and maintained her dignity even as Karen and her friends made subtle jabs about standards dropping and the help these days. The final test came with the bill. Karen's portion came to exactly $198.76 for her lobster thermometer, 2 glasses of premium wine, and a dessert she'd sent back twice before declaring it acceptable. She pulled out her premium credit card, deliberately filling out the tip line with a bold 0. "You know," she said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "I believe in earning your tips. Back in my day, we understood the value of real service." Gabrielle collected the check presenter, thanked them sincerely for their visit, and wished them a wonderful afternoon. As she walked away, she couldn't help but overhear Karen's final comment to her friends. "Well, I suppose this is what happens when they hire just anybody these days." What Karen didn't see was Gabrielle ducking into the break room for a moment, taking a deep breath as she looked at her phone. There was a text from her boyfriend. "Can't wait for you to meet my mom next week. She's going to love you as much as I do." Gabrielle looked at herself in the mirror, straightened her shoulders, and smiled. In a few months, she'd be Dr. Thompson, and no amount of prejudice could take that away from her. She had another table to serve, more dreams to chase, and a future that was bigger than one wealthy woman's attempt to make her feel small. As she stepped back onto the restaurant floor, she didn't know that fate had a surprising twist in store, one that would bring her face to face with Karen Davidson again under very different circumstances. But for now, she focused on what she did best, providing excellent service with unwavering professionalism, regardless of how she was treated in return. Meanwhile, Karen and her friends gathered their designer purses and made their way to the valet, already planning their next monthly meeting. Karen pulled out her phone, checking a message from her son about his upcoming visit home. "Ladies, Michael's finally bringing his girlfriend home to meet me next week. He says she's in medical school. At least he's dating someone with ambition." The irony of the situation hung in the air, unnoticed by everyone except fate itself, which was quietly setting the stage for a meeting that would challenge everything Karen thought she knew about herself and the world around her. 2 weeks after the restaurant incident, Karen's sprawling suburban home buzzed with excitement. She had spent the entire day preparing for her son's arrival, making sure everything was perfect, from the fresh flowers in the entryway to his favorite childhood meals warming in the oven. The house hadn't felt this alive in months, and even the housekeeper noticed Karen humming to herself as she adjusted the table settings for the third time. The sound of tires crunching on the circular driveway made Karen's heart leap. She hurried to the door, smoothing her designer dress, just as Michael's car pulled up. Her son, looking sharp in his tailored suit despite the long drive from Washington, D.C., stepped out with a bright smile that could light up the darkest room. "Mom," Michael called out, wrapping Karen in a warm embrace. At 32, he still towered over her, just like his father had. "The house smells amazing. Please tell me you made your famous pot roast." Karen beamed with pride. "Of course I did. And apple pie for dessert. Come in, come in. You look thin. Are you eating properly in D.C.?" Michael laughed as they walked inside, his briefcase and luggage temporarily forgotten in the car. "Mom, I have a personal trainer and a nutritionist. I'm eating better than ever." They settled into the familiar routine of mother and son, catching up over steaming mugs of coffee in the kitchen. Karen listened intently as Michael shared stories about his latest civil rights cases, though she occasionally raised an eyebrow at his more progressive stances. "You know, dear," she interrupted during one of his passionate speeches about workplace discrimination, "you could make so much more money in corporate law. Harrison and Blake have been asking about you again." Michael shook his head, a patient smile on his face. "Mom, we've been over this. I love what I do. Making a difference matters more than making millions." He paused, fidgeting with his coffee mug in a way that Karen recognized from his childhood. He was nervous about something. "Actually," he continued, "speaking of making a difference, I've met someone incredible, Mom. Someone who really gets it, you know. She's brilliant, compassionate, and she's going to change the world in her own way too." Karen's eyes lit up. Her son's love life had been a constant source of concern for her, especially since he'd broken up with the daughter of her friend Charlotte 2 years ago, a girl Karen had considered perfect for him. "Oh? Do tell. What's her background? Where did she go to school?" Michael's face softened in a way Karen had never seen before. "She's in her final year of medical school, top of her class. We met at a healthcare rights conference where she was speaking about medical accessibility in underserved communities. Mom, the way she talked about healthcare inequality and her plans to make a difference. I've never met anyone like her." Karen clasped her hands together, already imagining the society wedding she could plan. "That's wonderful, dear. What's her family like? Do they live in D.C.?" Actually, Michael shifted in his seat. "She's from here in Philadelphia. She's working her way through medical school on her own. It's one of the things I admire most about her, her determination, her work ethic. She doesn't come from money like we do, Mom, but she's going to be an amazing doctor." Karen's smile faltered slightly, but she caught herself. "Well, ambition is important. When do I get to meet this Wonder Woman?" Michael's face broke into a huge grin. "That's the best part. She's coming next weekend. I already told her so much about you, and she's excited to meet you. Mom, I think she might be the one." "Next weekend?" Karen's voice rose slightly. "That's very soon. I'll have to plan something special. Maybe invite the Blakes over." "No, Mom," Michael interrupted gently. "Just us, please. I want you to get to know her without any pressure. Trust me, you're going to love her as much as I do." As Michael went to get his bags from the car, Karen pulled out her phone to text her friend Linda. "Michael's bringing a girlfriend home next weekend. Apparently she's in medical school but working her way through. I suppose we'll see what that means." She didn't notice Michael watching her from the doorway, a slight frown crossing his face as he observed his mother's reaction. He pulled out his own phone, smiling at a text from his girlfriend. "Just finished my shift. Can't wait to see you next weekend." Neither of them could have guessed that the woman they were both thinking about was currently changing out of her restaurant uniform, her feet sore from another long day of serving people like Karen, her dreams of becoming a doctor carrying her forward despite every obstacle placed in her way. The stage was set for a meeting that would shake the foundations of Karen's carefully constructed world. As she busied herself planning the perfect dinner to impress this mysterious girlfriend, she had no idea that she'd already made quite an impression of her own, just not the kind she would have wanted. The Saturday evening of the anticipated dinner arrived with an unusual chill for a spring night. Karen had spent the entire day preparing, though she'd never admit to being nervous about meeting her son's girlfriend. The house smelled of roasting herbs and fresh-baked bread, and she pulled out her finest china, the set she usually reserved for Christmas dinner. "Mom, the table looks beautiful, but don't you think it's a bit much?" Michael asked, adjusting his tie as he walked into the dining room. He'd been watching his mother fuss over every detail all afternoon with growing amusement. "Nonsense," Karen replied, shifting a crystal wine glass a quarter-inch to the left. "First impressions matter, dear. You said she's working her way through medical school. I want her to see that hard work pays off." She smoothed her expensive silk blouse, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by her son. Michael opened his mouth to respond but was interrupted by the doorbell. His face lit up in that way that made Karen's heart both warm and worry. She'd never seen him this smitten before. "I'll get it." Michael practically jogged to the front door, leaving Karen to make one final adjustment to the flower arrangement, white lilies, perfectly scented. The sound of the heady front door opening echoed through the house. Karen took a deep breath, plastered on her best hostess smile, and turned toward the entryway. She could hear Michael's excited voice, "Mom's going to love you, I just know it." Time seemed to slow down as Michael led his girlfriend into the dining room. Karen's practiced smile froze on her face as she found herself staring into the equally shocked eyes of their waitress from Le Petit Jardin. Gabrielle stood there in an elegant but simple blue dress, holding a bouquet of fresh flowers. Her hair was styled differently than at the restaurant, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, but there was no mistaking her. The recognition that flashed between them was instant and electric. "Mom," Michael's voice seemed to come from far away, "this is Gabrielle, the amazing woman I've been telling you about." For a moment that felt like an eternity, nobody moved. Karen's mind raced through 1,000 thoughts at once, the horrible things she'd said at the restaurant, the zero tip, the dismissive comments to her friends. Her hands began to tremble slightly as she realized the full weight of what was happening. Gabrielle, however, was the first to break the tension. With grace that Karen couldn't help but admire, even in her shock, she stepped forward and extended her hand. "Mrs. Davidson, it's wonderful to meet you, again." Her voice was steady, professional, but there was an unmistakable emphasis on that last word. Michael looked between them, confusion creeping across his face. "Again? Have you two met?" Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The room seemed to spin slightly as her carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. Gabrielle smoothly filled the awkward silence. "Your mother has dined at Le Petit Jardin, where I work part-time to help with medical school expenses." She turned to Karen with a smile that held volumes of unspoken words. "I hope you found everything to your satisfaction during your last visit." The pointed question hung in the air like crystal about to shatter. Karen finally found her voice, though it came out higher than usual. Yes, of course. Please come in. Dinner is ready." Michael beamed, completely missing the undercurrent of tension. "Mom, wait until you hear about Gabrielle's research in pediatric oncology. She's developing new protocols for treatment in underserved communities." They moved to the dining room, where the elaborate place settings now seemed to mock Karen's earlier pretensions. As they sat down, she couldn't help but notice how perfectly poised Gabrielle was, how naturally she navigated the formal table setting, skills learned from years of high-end restaurant service. "Michael tells me you're quite involved in local charities, Mrs. Davidson," Gabrielle said as she elegantly placed her napkin in her lap. "I'd love to hear about your work with the Children's Hospital." Karen nearly choked on her water. The Children's Hospital, where she chaired committee meetings but had never once visited the actual patients, while Gabrielle probably spent countless hours caring for sick children. Yes, well, Karen struggled to find her usual smooth social grace. The perfect dinner she'd planned now felt like an elaborate trap of her own making. Michael, still oblivious to the tension, launched into a story about how he and Gabrielle met. "You should have seen her, Mom. Standing up in front of all those healthcare executives, arguing for better access to medical care. She was brilliant." As the evening progressed, Karen found herself watching Gabrielle with new eyes. Every graceful movement, Every articulate comment about healthcare policy and medical ethics, every gentle smile at Michael's jokes, it all painted a picture so different from the assumptions she'd made at the restaurant. The crystal glasses caught the light, throwing prisms on the wall that seemed to dance with the same tension that filled the room. With each passing moment, Karen realized that this dinner wasn't just about meeting her son's girlfriend, it was about facing her own prejudices in the harsh light of reality. And somewhere between the main course and dessert, as she watched her son's face light up while Gabrielle discussed her plans to open a clinic in an underserved neighborhood, Karen Davidson began to understand that she was the one who would be judged tonight, not by her expensive china or her perfectly cooked meal, but by how she would handle the consequences of her own actions. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 10, its deep chimes marking the end of what felt like the longest dinner of Karen's life. Gabrielle had just left, declining Michael's offer to drive her home, saying she had an early hospital rotation in the morning. The sound of her car pulling out of the driveway seemed to release a tension that had been building all evening. Michael stood at the window, watching until Gabrielle's taillights disappeared around the corner. When he turned back to face his mother, his usually warm brown eyes had hardened into something Karen had never seen before. "So," he said, his voice unnaturally calm, "want to tell me what happened at the restaurant?" Karen busied herself collecting wine glasses, her hands slightly unsteady. "I don't know what you mean, dear. Would you help me with these dishes?" "Mom." Michael's tone stopped her in her tracks. "I saw how you looked at her when she walked in. I noticed the tension, and I definitely noticed how you could barely look her in the eye all evening. What did you do?" Karen set the glasses down harder than she intended, the crystal making a dangerous tinkling sound. I didn't realize she would be our server that day. The service was, well, it wasn't what I expected from Le Petit Jardin." "What exactly wasn't up to your standards?" Michael moved closer, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. Was it her knowledge of the menu? Her professionalism? Or was it something else entirely? The accusation in his voice made Karen flinch. "You don't understand, Michael. There are certain standards." "Standards?" Michael's laugh was bitter. "Like the standard of leaving no tip on a $200 bill?" "Yes, Gabrielle told me everything just now outside. She didn't want to, you know. She's been protecting you since the moment she walked in, making excuses for your behavior, trying to keep the peace." Karen sank into a dining room chair, her perfectly manicured hands clutching her designer dress. "I didn't know she was your girlfriend. If I had known." "That's exactly the problem, Mom." Michael's voice rose with frustration. "Would it have made a difference if you knew she was dating me? Would that have made her more worthy of basic respect in your eyes? Because if so, that's even worse." In the kitchen, the expensive coffee maker beeped insistently, ignored by both mother and son as they faced each other across the emotional chasm that had suddenly opened between them. "I spent my entire career fighting against prejudice," Michael continued, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I've stood in courtrooms arguing cases about workplace discrimination, about people being judged for all the wrong reasons, and here you are, my own mother, embodying everything I fight against." Karen felt tears welling up in her eyes. "That's not fair, Michael. I support your work. I donate to your causes. Writing checks isn't enough, Mom. This isn't about money. It's about basic human dignity." He paced the room, his father's old habits showing in his agitated movements. "Do you know what Gabrielle did after your lunch that day? She went straight to her hospital rotation, where she spent 6 hours helping save a child's life. Then she went home and studied until 2 a.m. for her board exams. She never once complained about how you treated her." Meanwhile, across town, Gabrielle sat in her small apartment, phone in hand, talking to her best friend Rose. "I don't know what I expected," Gabrielle sighed, curled up in her worn but comfortable reading chair. "But watching her face when she recognized me, Rose, it was like seeing someone's whole world view shatter in slow motion." "Girl, I can't believe you stayed through the whole dinner," Rose's voice crackled through the speaker. "You're a better person than me. I would have walked right back out that door." Gabrielle smiled sadly, looking at a photo of her and Michael on her phone. "I stayed for him. You should have seen his face when he introduced us. He was so proud, so happy. I couldn't bear to ruin that moment." Back at the Davidson house, the confrontation continued. I thought I raised you better than this, Karen whispered, more to herself than to Michael. No, Mom. You raised me to be exactly who I am. You taught me to work hard, to stand up for what I believe in, to recognize quality in people. That's exactly what I'm doing right now. He stopped pacing and looked directly at her. Gabrielle is incredible. She's brilliant, kind, and stronger than anyone I know. And if you can't see past your prejudices to recognize that, then you're going to lose a lot more than just your regular table at Le Petit Jardin. The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Karen thought about how Gabrielle had handled the entire evening with grace, how she'd asked thoughtful questions about Karen's charity work, even complimented the meal, all while sitting at a table with someone who had treated her so poorly. She makes me want to be a better person, Mom, Michael said softly. Maybe it's time for you to think about what kind of person you want to be too. He turned and walked upstairs to his old room, leaving Karen alone with the remains of the dinner party and the pieces of her carefully constructed worldview scattered around her like the crystal she'd so proudly displayed just hours before. In the quiet of the house, Karen picked up her phone, seeing messages from her lunch friends asking about the dinner. For the first time, their casual prejudices, so often wrapped in polite phrases and knowing looks, made her stomach turn. She set the phone down without responding and walked to her study, where a donation check to the children's hospital lay half-written on her desk. She stared at it for a long moment, remembering how Gabrielle's face had lit up talking about her pediatric patients, how she'd spoken about healthcare inequality with such passion and knowledge. The check suddenly seemed like such a small thing. A way to feel good without actually doing good. The night stretched out before her, promising hours of self-reflection she'd spent decades avoiding. Upstairs, she could hear Michael on the phone, his voice soft as he presumably talked to Gabrielle. The love in his tone was unmistakable. And for the first time that evening, Karen felt truly ashamed, not just of her actions, but of the thinking behind them. The morning after the dinner, Karen sat in her usual spot at Le Petit Jardin, but this time everything felt different. Her friends chatted around her, their voices a blow of familiar complaints and gossip, but her eyes kept drifting to the empty tables in Gabrielle's section. Karen? Karen. Linda's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. You haven't said a word about the dinner last night. How bad was it? Did she at least know which fork to use? Linda laughed at her own joke, several others joining in. Karen stared into her untouched coffee, watching the cream create swirling patterns on the surface. The jokes that once would have made her smile now made her stomach twist. Actually, she said slowly, she was perfectly lovely. The table fell silent. Patricia, who had been scrolling through her phone, looked up with raised eyebrows. Lovely? But you said she was working her way through medical school. Surely she wasn't, you know, our kind of people. Our kind of people. Karen repeated the words, hearing them as if for the first time. And what kind of people would that be, Patricia? The kind who judge others without knowing anything about them. The kind who treat service workers like they're invisible. Linda reached across the table, patting Karen's hand condescendingly. Darling, are you feeling all right? You're not yourself today. Maybe I don't want to be myself anymore, Karen whispered, pulling her hand away. She opened her phone and, for the first time, really looked at Gabrielle's social media profile that Michael had mentioned the night before. The screen filled with images that told a story so different from what Karen had assumed. There was Gabrielle in her white coat, surrounded by smiling children at the hospital. Another showed her receiving an award for her research on improving healthcare access in underserved communities. Yet another captured her volunteering at a free clinic, her warm smile the same one she'd offered even during Karen's worst behavior at the restaurant. Oh my goodness, Patricia's voice dripped with fake concern as she peered at Karen's phone. Isn't that our waitress from last month? The one you said was so terrible? Don't tell me she's Michael's girlfriend. Karen cut her off, her voice firm. And she's going to be an incredible doctor. The table erupted in poorly concealed gasps and whispers. Karen could feel their judgment shifting from Gabrielle to her, could see them already planning how this gossip would spread through their social circle. Well, Linda said with a tight smile, I suppose we'll have to find a new restaurant for our monthly lunches. We can't very well come here anymore, knowing what we know. Karen stood up, gathering her belongings. You're right, Linda. You should find a new restaurant. I won't be joining you anymore. She walked out of Le Petit Jardin, leaving her friends in shocked silence. Outside, the spring air felt fresher somehow, as if she'd been holding her breath for years without realizing it. Back at home, Karen spent hours scrolling through her social media, seeing it through new eyes. How many times has she liked posts that subtly put others down? How often has she shared in the casual prejudices of her social circle without thinking about the real people affected by their words and actions? Her phone buzzed with messages from her lunch group, ranging from concern about her strange behavior to not-so-subtle reminders about maintaining their social standards. She ignored them all, instead finding herself drawn to a post about the Children's Hospital's upcoming fundraiser. The event page showed Gabrielle as one of the organizing committee members working to raise money for new pediatric equipment. Karen had always written checks for such causes, but she'd never actually attended the events or met the people involved. Without letting herself overthink it, she clicked the volunteer button. A form appeared, asking for her availability and skills. Her cursor hovered over the exit button as doubt crept in. What did she really have to offer besides money? Then she remembered Gabrielle's words from dinner. Every person has something valuable to contribute, Mrs. Davidson. Sometimes we just need to step outside our comfort zone to find out what that is. As she filled out the form, her phone buzzed again. This time it was Michael. "Mom, I want you to know that despite everything, Gabrielle insisted on keeping her shift at Le Petit Jardin. She said she won't let anyone's prejudice stop her from achieving her goals. Maybe you could learn something from her." Karen's eyes welled with tears as she typed her response. "I already am, dear. I already am." Later that afternoon, she found herself parked outside the Children's Hospital. Through the windows, she could see Gabrielle in her white coat, showing a young patient something on a tablet, both of them laughing. The scene struck Karen with its simple humanity. No pretense, no judgment, just pure connection. Her phone buzzed one final time. It was Patricia. "We've decided to move our monthly lunch to the Bristol Club. Much more. Exclusive. We trust you'll be back to your old self by then." Karen watched as Gabrielle high-fived the child and moved on to her next patient, her step energetic despite what must have been exhaustion from her long hours. With sudden clarity, Karen typed her response. "No, Patricia, I won't be. And for the first time in my life, I'm glad about that." She sat there for a long moment, watching the normal flow of hospital life. Families coming and going, staff hurrying between rooms, life happening in all its messy, beautiful reality. The carefully constructed walls of her social world were crumbling, but in their place, she felt something new beginning to grow, something that felt a lot like hope. A week had passed since the dinner that changed everything. The local coffee shop, the Daily Grind, was unusually quiet for a Saturday morning. Karen sat alone at a corner table, absently stirring her untouched latte while reviewing the volunteer orientation packet from the Children's Hospital. The past week had been a blur of ignored calls from her old friends and long conversations with Michael, who remained cautiously optimistic about his mother's efforts to change. The bell above the door chimed, and Karen looked up out of habit. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw Gabrielle walking in, still wearing her hospital badge from what must have been an overnight shift. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment neither moved. Gabrielle ordered her coffee, plain black with an extra shot of espresso, and to Karen's surprise, walked directly to her table. "May I join you, Mrs. Davidson?" Karen gestured to the empty chair, her hands trembling slightly. "Please," and "Call me Karen." They sat in awkward silence as the espresso machine hissed in the background. Finally, Gabrielle spoke, her voice tired but steady. "Michael told me you've signed up to volunteer at the hospital." "Yes, Karen fiddled with her coffee cup. "I thought it was time to do more than just write checks." Gabrielle took a long sip of her coffee, studying Karen over the rim of her cup. "You know, the night we met at the restaurant, I had just finished a 12-hour shift at the hospital. There was a little girl, only 6 years old, fighting leukemia. She was scared about losing her hair, so I spent my lunch break showing her pictures of beautiful, bold women, models, athletes, warriors." Karen's throat tightened as Gabrielle continued. "After my shift, I went straight to the restaurant. My feet were killing me, but we were short-staffed, and those tips helped pay for my textbooks. When you and your friends walked in, I promised myself I'd give you the best service possible, just like I did for that little girl, with dignity, respect, and care." "I'm so sorry," Karen whispered, but Gabrielle held up her hand. "Please, let me finish. You know what that little girl said to me?" She said, "Dr. Gabrielle, my mom says that being beautiful isn't about what's on your head, but what's in your heart." And she was right. That's what I thought about when you left no tip, when you made those comments. I thought about her wisdom and how some adults could learn from her. The morning sun streamed through the coffee shop windows, casting warm light across their table. A barista wiped down nearby tables, pretending not to listen to their conversation. "The thing is, Mrs. Davidson, Karen," Gabrielle corrected herself, "I've worked hard for everything I have. My parents taught me that dignity isn't something other people can take from you. It's something you maintain by how you treat others, especially those who try to diminish you." Karen's eyes filled with tears. "Your parents sound very wise." "They are. My father worked 2 jobs to put food on our table. My mother cleaned houses, including some in your neighborhood, to help pay for my undergraduate degree. They taught me that real class has nothing to do with money and everything to do with how you treat people." The coffee shop had grown quieter, as if the whole room was holding its breath. "When Michael told me about his mother," Gabrielle continued, "he described someone who taught him to fight for what's right, to stand up for his beliefs. He said you raised him to see the best in people. That's the woman he loves. That's the woman I hoped to meet at dinner." Karen wiped her eyes with a napkin. "I've disappointed him, disappointed myself." "Maybe," Gabrielle said softly. "But disappointment can be a good teacher if we're willing to learn from it. I see you're reading the volunteer orientation packet." Karen looked down at the papers spread across the table. "I don't know if I'll be any good at it. I usually just attend the fundraising galas. You know what makes a good volunteer?" Gabrielle leaned forward. "Someone who's willing to learn, to put aside their preconceptions, to see people as people. The fact that you're even considering it shows you're changing." "Why are you being so kind to me?" Karen asked, her voice breaking. "After how I treated you." Gabrielle smiled, and for the first time, Karen saw what Michael must have seen, not just beauty, but a deep well of compassion and strength. "Because holding on to anger only hurts ourselves, and because I believe people can change when they're brave enough to face their own prejudices." She reached into her bag and pulled out a hospital ID badge. "This is your volunteer badge. I processed it myself yesterday. Your orientation is on Tuesday at 9 a.m. I'll be leading part of the training." Karen stared at the badge, her photo looking back at her uncertainly. "You're giving me a chance I don't deserve." "Everyone deserves a chance to be better than their worst moments," Gabrielle said, standing up. "That's what I tell my patients, and that's what I believe about you." She gathered her things, then paused. "Oh, and Karen? This time, don't forget to tip your barista." With that, she walked out, leaving Karen holding the badge and feeling, for the first time in weeks, like she might find her way to being the person her son had always believed she could be. The barista appeared with a fresh latte, placing it gently on the table. "On the house," she said with a kind smile. "Looks like you could use it." Karen looked at the heart design in the foam, then at the tip jar on the counter. Standing up, she walked over and emptied her wallet into it. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about recognizing the humanity in every person, one small gesture at a time. 6 months had passed since that life-changing dinner. The Children's Hospital buzzed with excitement as volunteers and staff prepared for the annual fundraising gala. Streamers and balloons transformed the usual clinical atmosphere into something magical, but the real transformation was in the woman directing the decorating committee. A little higher on the left, Karen called out, gesturing to the welcome banner. She checked her clipboard, the pages worn from constant use over the past months. Her designer clothes had been replaced by practical business wear, and her perfectly manicured nails now often bore traces of paint from art therapy sessions with the young patients. "Mrs. D." A small voice called out. Karen turned to see Emmy, a 7-year-old patient, wheeling herself over. "Did you bring more stories today?" "After the gala, sweetheart," Karen smiled, kneeling down to the girl's level. "But I heard Dr. Gabrielle is doing her special puppet show in the children's ward this afternoon. Will you come watch with me?" Emmy asked, her eyes bright despite the chemotherapy that had taken her hair. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The past months had taught Karen more than she'd learned in all her years of charity galas and committee meetings. She'd learned the names of every child in the long-term care ward, their favorite stories, their fears, and their dreams. She'd held hands during difficult procedures, celebrated small victories, and sometimes just sat in silence with parents who needed someone to lean on. The main hall was filling up with guests when Michael arrived, looking handsome in his tuxedo. He watched his mother move through the crowd with natural ease, but instead of her old social butterfly routine, she was introducing donors to actual patients and their families, letting the real stories of the hospital touch hearts and open wallets. "Your mother's quite something," Gabrielle said, appearing beside him in an elegant blue evening gown. "Yesterday, she spent 3 hours helping our teenage patients organize a prom in the recreation room. The old Karen Davidson would have just written a check and called it a day." Michael squeezed her hand. The old Karen Davidson wouldn't have known what she was missing. The lights dimmed for the presentation. Karen took the stage, her hands only slightly shaking as she faced the crowd. Many of her old social circle were there, including Linda and Patricia, seated stiffly in the back. "6 months ago," Karen began, her voice clear and strong, "I thought I knew what it meant to help others. I wrote checks, attended galas, and put my name on donor lists. I thought that was enough. I was wrong." She gestured to the photos on the screen behind her, real moments from hospital life. Children playing in the therapy garden she'd helped plant. Teenagers in hospital gowns having their makeshift prom. Volunteers reading stories, painting murals, simply being present. True giving isn't just about money. It's about time, attention, and most importantly, love. It's about seeing every person's dignity and worth, regardless of their circumstances. I learned this lesson through the grace and wisdom of someone I once wronged. Her eyes found Gabrielle in the crowd. "Dr. Thompson taught me that real class isn't about what you own or where you live. It's about how you treat others. Every single person in this room, every person you meet in your daily life, has a story worth knowing, dreams worth supporting, and dignity worth respecting." The room was silent as Karen continued. "Tonight, we're not just raising money, we're building a community. Every dollar donated will be matched by volunteer hours from our community members. Because writing checks is good, but giving your time and heart is priceless." After the presentation, as guests mingled and donation pledges poured in, Linda approached Karen. "We miss you at our monthly lunches," she said stiffly. Karen smiled gently. "You know, Linda, I had lunch in the hospital cafeteria yesterday with Amy's mother. She told me about her dreams of going back to school, about her struggles and hopes. It was the most meaningful conversation I've had in years." Before Linda could respond, Gabrielle appeared. "Karen, Amy's asking for you. It's story time." "Excuse me, Linda," Judy calls. Karen followed Gabrielle to the children's ward, where several young patients had gathered for their nightly story routine. Later that evening, as the gala wound down, Karen found herself in the hospital garden with Michael and Gabrielle. The night air was cool, and fairy lights twinkled in the trees she'd helped plant. "Mom," Michael said, his arm around Gabrielle's waist, "we have something to tell you." Karen noticed the way they looked at each other, the subtle glow about Gabrielle. Her heart swelled with joy and anticipation. "We're engaged," Gabrielle announced, holding out her hand to show a simple but elegant ring. "And we'd like you to help us plan the wedding." Karen felt tears welling up, happy tears, grateful tears. "I would be honored," she said, hugging them both. "But only if we can have the reception here in the hospital garden. Some of our most important guests can't travel far." Gabrielle's eyes sparkled. "That's exactly what we were thinking. Amy's already called dibs on being flower girl." As they walked back inside, Karen paused to straighten a child's artwork on the wall. A bright crayon drawing labeled "My Hospital Family." In it, stick figures of doctors, nurses, patients, and volunteers stood hand in hand, including one labeled Mrs. D with a big red heart drawn around it. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, so concerned with appearance and status. That woman would never have known the joy of being part of this drawing, of being truly part of something bigger than herself. "Come in, Mom," Michael called from down the hall. "Yes," Karen replied, taking one last look at the drawing. Yes, I am. And she was coming into a new understanding of family, of worth, of what it truly meant to be our kind of people. As she joined her son and future daughter-in-law, she knew that their kind of people meant simply this: people who chose love over prejudice, growth over comfort, and service over status. The hospital corridors echoed with the sound of their laughter as they left, planning a wedding that would celebrate not just the union of two people, but the transformation of many hearts, one small act of kindness at a time.